That summer my cousin Theo and I were staying at my uncle's place down in southern West Virginia, out in the kind of backwoods where phone signals go to die and the roads just stop being roads. Uncle Rick owns a scrapyard on the edge of a dying town called Lakin. You probably never heard of it, and if you have, I'm a little worried for you. Place is more rust than structure. He rents out a few busted trailers on the lot to folks who pay in cash and don't ask for leases. Theo and I were supposed to be helping out for a couple weeks. Pulling copper out of old air conditioners, chopping up wire bundles for cash, that kind of thing. Not glamorous, but it paid. Most nights we'd just chill on top of the trailer with cheap sodas and this half-broken Bluetooth speaker Theo found in a bin of junk. It only played out of one side, but it was something. We'd sit there watching the sky dim, listening to music, daring each other to jump off the roof when we got bored. The one night, think it was a Thursday, Theo got weird. It was around 10. We were both on the roof sharing a sleeve of saltines for dinner when he started glancing toward the woods behind the junkyard. Not casually, like something was pulling at his attention. I asked him what was up, but he just kind of shrugged. Then he said, "Want to see something weird?" Didn't even wait for me to answer. Just climbed down and headed toward the edge of the lot like it was already decided. I thought he was talking about an old mine shaft or a car someone had rolled into a ditch. Maybe some kind of backwoods altar. I don't know. He had that look. We grabbed the flashlight Rick kept duct taped to the porch railing. It rattled when you shook it, but it worked. We headed into the trees. There wasn't a real trail, just a narrow cut where deer or coyotes had worn down the brush. Theo walked ahead like he'd been there before. After 5 or 6 minutes, he said we were going to the Merritt house. He said it used to belong to this family back in the 60s. The Merritts, 2 parents, 3 kids. One night they just vanished, no suitcases missing, no card on, just empty. Cops said they must have left town in the middle of the night, but no one ever found them. No sightings, no credit card trail, nothing. Their house got swallowed up by vines and rumors. Theo's brother once dared a girl to sleep there. She didn't make it through the night, came back barefoot and shaking, said the inside of the house didn't stay the same, like the walls moved around her. She wouldn't talk about it again. I thought it was a tall tale. Then we got there. The trees opened up like a curtain, and the house was just sitting there, 2 stories tall, sagging in the middle like it had given up on itself. Ivy had grown over the windows. Porch collapsed on one side. No lights, no sound. Even the air felt wrong. Stale. Still. We leaned our bikes against a pine tree and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked but didn't break. Theo said he'd come here once, but only looked through the windows. This time he wanted to go in. We slipped through a side door hanging by one hinge and stepped into what was probably the kitchen once. Floor was mostly rotted through. A couple chairs sat in a corner like they'd been waiting forever. The hallway was long and narrow with torn wallpaper hanging down in strips. Theo pulled out his phone and started filming like he was making some kind of ghost hunting documentary. "Tell us your secrets, Merritt family," he whispered, swinging the flashlight side to side. The light passed over scratches everywhere. Door frames, walls, even the ceiling. Some were thin and frantic, like fingernails. Others were deep and straight, like a knife had been dragged across the wood. I told him to stop messing around. Just keep quiet and look. He nodded and slipped his phone into his hoodie. At the end of the hall, we found a room that looked like no one had touched it in 50 years. Broken couch, wood stove sealed shut with wire, lamp missing its shade. Theo pulled out his phone again, but it blinked off in his hand. Battery icon flashed once, then nothing. He swore it had been fully charged. I checked mine. It was at 70% when we left. Now it was at 15. I watched it drop to 14, then 13. We looked at each other and didn't say anything. We both turned around at the same time, and the hallway was different. Longer, wider, with doors on both sides now. I looked behind us, the room we'd just left, gone, solid wall, like we'd walked into something that closed behind us. Theo whispered, "We didn't go upstairs, right?" I shook my head, and then right above us we heard it. 2 footsteps, not squeaking floorboards, not a house settling, just 2 solid, slow steps right over our heads, then silence. I reached for my phone again, dead. Theo tried his again, still nothing. We kept walking. Every room we passed looked like a copy of the last one, but wrong. One had the same couch on the opposite wall. One had the same lamp, only upside down on the floor. One had photos on the walls, but they were all turned around. Glass shattered, frames crooked. Then we reached the room with the candles. Dozens of them, all lit, lined in perfect rows across the floor. But no smell, no smoke. The walls were plastered with Polaroids. Every photo showed two boys standing in front of this exact house. Same clothes, same flashlight, same time of night. Theo stepped forward and peeled one off the wall. "Dude," he whispered, "look, it was us standing on the porch. Same faces, same posture, not smiling, not moving." He grabbed another, different angle, still us. I pulled one off the far wall. This one was just me, standing at the top of a staircase we hadn't even found yet. There was a shadow behind me. It wasn't Theo. We backed out of the room, started trying every door we passed, all locked. Or they just led back into the same hallway. Theo started tapping Morse code on the wall with the flashlight. I don't know why. Then the candles all went out at once. No flickering, just black. Theo whispered, "Run." So we ran. The hallway twisted. A staircase appeared that hadn't been there before. We bolted down it and hit a kitchen that didn't match the one we entered through. This one looked clean, like disturbingly clean. Counters wiped. Newspaper on the table dated July 12th, 1963. Then we saw the front door wide open. No sound outside, just stillness. We didn't wait. We ran. We ran. Through the doorway into the woods. No trail, just branches clawing at us, roots trying to trip us up. We burst into the clearing gasping, and our bikes were still there. But our phones on the ground, screens on battery levels, 75 and 80 calls from Rick. 6 of them. The flashlight was in my jacket pocket. Still warm, still working. We didn't talk on the ride back. Theo locked the trailer door and threw a towel over the window. He backed up the photos from his phone and powered it down. We didn't tell Rick anything. Said we got turned around in the woods. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning we went back. Same path. Same clearing. No house. No porch. Just trees. Thick and undisturbed. We searched for hours. Even pulled up satellite images. Nothing. But the photos are still on Theo's drive. 42 of them. All time stamped between 10:47 and 11:34. All showing us inside that house. Some with us standing, some sitting, some with our backs to the camera. Deleted mine. Theo didn't. He said one day he'd figure it out. I said I was never setting foot in that forest again. Buddy of mine, Josh, convinced me to check out this old house buried deep in the woods behind Southridge. We'd spent that summer poking around abandoned barns, collapsing sheds and forgotten trailers, mostly for fun, partly because we were bored out of our minds. But this place was different. Locals called it the Morton Place. No one knew who the Mortons were, or if they'd ever actually lived there, but the name stuck. It sat at the end of a half-erased logging road, so overgrown you'd miss the turn if you blinked. We had to park a mile out and hike the rest of the way, brushing through vines and ducking low branches. When we finally saw it, the house looked like it had been left behind by time. Trees had wrapped around it, their roots pushing up under the porch. The whole structure leaned, like it was mid-fall, and the front steps had mostly given up. It was the kind of place where you expected raccoons or snakes, not something worse. But the second I saw it, my stomach tightened. I didn't say anything to Josh. He would have just laughed and gone in louder. The front door was gone, just an open frame hanging crooked. Inside it felt like someone had hit pause and walked away 30 years ago. The floor creaked hard under our boots, but held. The kitchen had chairs tipped on their sides. Plates smashed on the floor near the stove like someone had thrown them in a fight. There was a mattress in what used to be the living room, slumped sideways and ripped open. The stuffing was pulled out in big moldy clumps. The air was stale, almost sharp, like dust mixed with something dry and sour. We didn't find anything valuable, just the usual junk. Old cans, peeling linoleum, broken mirrors. But in the back of the house, where the wallpaper peeled in long strips like old skin, we found this trunk wedged under a fallen ceiling beam. We had to work together to drag it out. It scraped across the floor like it was trying to stay put. The lock was rusted to hell, but when I tugged it, the metal just crumbled. Inside were clothes. Not modern stuff, dresses, shirts, lace-up boots, all folded like someone meant to come back for them. They fell apart when I touched them, soft as paper ash. Underneath was something wrapped in a faded piece of floral cloth. It felt heavier than it should have. I remember saying that out loud. Josh shrugged. I unwrapped it and felt my hands go still. It was a small doll, handmade, obviously only about 6 inches tall, but dense. The body was woven from some kind of coarse dark thread, too rough for yarn, too fibrous for twine. It felt solid in my hand, packed tight, like it wasn't hollow at all. It wore a little dress, faded blue with a red hem, decorated with cheap plastic beads. The face had 2 stitch lines for eyes, nothing else. No mouth, no nose. Still, it felt like it was looking right at me. I turned it over and something poked against my palm. A sharp edge. I peeled back the cloth and found a long, smooth metal spike running through its core. No hook, no loop. Just a solid pointed spike that had no business being there. I felt a chill run through my fingers, but I didn't say anything. I shoved it into my backpack and told Josh I'd grab a better look later. We left after that. Didn't say much on the way back. I think we are both weirded out in different ways. That night my stomach started to twist. It came on slow. I figured it was heat exhaustion or something dumb I ate. By midnight I was curled on the bathroom floor, sweating through my shirt and shivering like it was snowing indoors. I couldn't keep water down. Every hour I was back in there, heaving so hard I thought something might snap inside me. 3 full days like that. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My skin burned in frozen waves, but no one else got sick. Not my mom, not my little brother. They ate everything I did, drank the same water. They were fine. When the fever finally broke, I felt hollow. I lost weight, couldn't stand for long without bracing myself. And the figure sat there the whole time on my desk, exactly where I dropped it. I didn't have the strength to touch it, could barely even look at it without feeling that tight knot return to my stomach. Eventually school started up again. Life got busy. I stopped thinking about it so much. The figure blended into the clutter of my room. Almost a year later, my friend Talia came over after class. We had biology together, and she was one of those people who always said weird things with too much confidence. She told me once she could feel energy in places and objects. I didn't believe it, but she was smart and funny, and honestly, I liked hanging out with her. That evening we were sitting in my room. Bag of chips between us, music low. Out of nowhere, she just stopped mid-chew and stared across the room. I followed her gaze. She was looking at the figure. She stood up and crossed a room without a word. Picked it up, held it for a second, then looked at me with this tight, unsettled look. She said her hand felt like it was buzzing, like static crawling under her skin. Then she said something I still hear in my head. "This thing doesn't belong here." I tried to joke. Told her it was just a weird souvenir from an old house. But when I mentioned what happened after I found it, how sick I got, her face drained. She set it down fast. Said we needed to get rid of it. Not tomorrow. Not later. Right then. My parents were both working late shifts that night, so we had the house to ourselves. We grabbed the figure, went out back, and dropped it into our old rusted burn barrel behind the shed. I struck a match and tossed it in. Cloth caught, but the figure didn't burn easily. We wrapped it in newspaper, lit it again. Eventually the flames took hold. The dress shriveled. Smoke curled upward. Then the fire flared high. Fast. Violent. Like something inside it had burst. Talia grabbed my arm. Said I needed to speak. Not ask. Command. Command. Her tone left no room for debate. So I said it something like, "You're not welcome here. You have to go. Leave now." The flame shot up as if answering. That's when we heard it. From inside the house, a high-pitched mechanical screech. We looked at each other and ran. My room was glowing. My alarm clock was screaming, even though it was unplugged. I yanked it out of the wall. It went silent. Then the beeping started again from a different drawer. I dug through until I found this old handheld game. I hadn't touched it in years. It was lit up, the screen flickering, making this twisted broken noise like static mixed with screaming. I grabbed it and smashed it against the floor. Again and again until the casing split and the sound stopped. We went back outside. The fire had mostly died down. The figure was gone. Just ash and melted plastic beads. Except for one thing. The hair, just a small bit of it, was still burning. A slow, steady flame that refused to go out. I stood there staring at it until Talia pulled me back inside. That night, I dreamed about the fire. In the dream, it was pitch black out, but I could still see the barrel glowing. And around it, figures stood in a circle. All of them wore dark hoods. They chanted something low and rhythmic, but I couldn't understand it. The doll was in the center, twisting in the flames like it was alive. One figure turned toward me. The hood was empty, just a hole of blackness, but I felt it looking straight through me. Then it spoke, not with words exactly. I just knew what it wanted. Wanted me to repeat the chant. So I did. The first 2 words came easy. The third caught in my throat. I woke up gasping. Morning light poured through my window. I tried to laugh it off. Tried to forget. But things changed after that. Slowly, then all at once. My dad lost his job that fall. A budget cut, they said. The mortgage fell behind. The bank started calling every week. Then my mom crashed her car on Ridgeway Pass. She knew that road like the back of her hand. She wasn't speeding. No other cars. She swerved like something had jumped in front of her. Totaled it. After that, the house got tense. Sharp. Like the walls themselves were angry. We started arguing more. Dumb stuff at first. Then bigger. It felt like we couldn't talk without it turning into a fight. I kept thinking about the figure. Whether burning it helped. Or if, maybe we did the wrong thing. Where I grew up, in a town called Merrow's Hollow tucked deep in the southern Appalachians, there wasn't a whole lot going on. You had your gas stations with hand-painted signs, a diner that still served liver and onions on Thursdays, and a single road that wound like a cracked ribbon around the hills. But more than anything, you had the ridge. It rose up at the edge of town like a spine, thick with trees and old stories. Everyone knew about the row of abandoned houses halfway up the ridge. They weren't hidden or anything, just sat there, leaning into the hillside, barely visible through the trees. People called them the company homes. Back when the mining company still ran the show in Merrow's Hollow, that's where the workers' families lived. Then the mines shut down. The families packed up, some overnight, and no one ever moved in after. Over the years, the roofs sank, the porches sagged, and vines crept up the sides like they were trying to swallow the buildings whole. By the time I was a kid, the houses were more myth than memory. Parents warned us to stay away. Soft floors, they said, rotten beams, snakes, nails sticking up like little landmines. But they could have put up a fence and posted guards, and we still would have been drawn to it. It was the kind of place you dared your friends to go near, then secretly wondered what you'd do if someone actually took the dare. That day, I wasn't even dared. I just got bored. My cousins were playing baseball in the yard, and I was tired of chasing foul balls into poison ivy. So I slipped away behind the church, past the rusted-out swing set, and found the old footpath that led into the trees. It was narrow and overgrown, more animal trail than hiking path, but I'd followed it before. Never all the way to the houses, though. As I climbed, the air got cooler, and I remember thinking how quiet it was. No birds, no breeze, just the crunch of leaves under my sneakers and the occasional snap of the twig. There was this sharp smell like pine needles and something metallic, and every now and then a bit of broken glass sparkled in the dirt. Probably old beer bottles or something, but they looked like tiny traps. By the time I reached the first house, my legs were coated in dust, and I was sweating through my shirt. The place looked worse up close. The boards over the windows were sun-bleached and warped like they were trying to peel away from whatever was inside. The door barely hung from one hinge. Crooked like it had been yanked halfway off and then left to rot. I just wanted to peek inside. That was it. One look, then back down the trail. The front room was dim, but I could still see. There wasn't much, just a rusted wood stove in the corner and a couch that looked like a raccoon had been nesting in it. Wallpaper peeled in, curling strips, exposing yellowed newspaper underneath. I remember reading part of a headline, 3 missing after shaft collapse. The date was from the 60s. I stepped in slowly, testing the floor before each footfall. It groaned and shifted under my weight. I kept expecting a board to give out and send me crashing into the crawl space. There was a built-in cabinet in one wall. Inside the drawer I found a few bent spoons and a photograph. The photo was old and creased, showing a boy holding a fishing pole by a muddy creek. But someone had scratched out his eyes with something sharp, maybe a nail or a key. I just stared at it, suddenly aware of how still the room was around me. Then from somewhere upstairs, I heard a door close, not slam, not creak, close. Soft, deliberate. There was no wind, no reason for anything to move. I froze, listened, heard nothing else. Still, I called out, just in case someone else had wandered up there. No answer. After a few long seconds, I made my way to the staircase. Each step moaned under me like it was complaining. At the top, the hallway stretched left and right, and every single door was standing open. I checked each room. No one. Nothing. Just more peeling walls and empty space. One room had a bare mattress on the floor, springs exposed like ribs. Along one wall, someone had lined up glass jars, dozens of them. Each one sealed with wax filled with dirt, dust, or something darker. Some held tiny objects, buttons, shards of glass, bits of bone, maybe insect husks. I don't know. I was leaning in trying to see better when something crashed out in the hall. Sharp, loud, sudden, I jerked around. Nothing was there. I backed out of the room, not taking my eyes off the hallway, walked carefully to the stairs. But when I got to the bottom, I stopped cold. The kitchen chairs, 3 of them had been scattered when I walked in. Now they were arranged in a straight line, all facing the front door like they were waiting for something. I hadn't heard a thing, and then the stove door swung open with a metal clang. That was it. I ran straight out the door and down the trail, half tripping over roots. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not mine, not echoes. They were too close, too deliberate. When I stopped, they stopped. When I ran, they ran. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned. My hands stung from brushing branches. I just kept going until the trees opened and I hit the edge of town. Only then did I stop and look behind me. The trail was empty, but way up at the top I could see the house I'd been in and the door. The door was closing slowly, not slamming, just easing shut, like someone was pushing it from inside. I didn't tell anyone, didn't want to be the kid who cried ghosts, but I avoided that trail for years, even when my cousins teased me about being too old for spooky stories. My cousin Caleb had this rust-colored Ford pickup that coughed like an old man every time it started. He had more free time than since, and I was crashing at his place for the week. This lopsided little house with green siding and a busted porch swing, and a forgotten town buried somewhere in western Virginia. The town didn't have much to offer. No movie theater, no real restaurants, just a single grocery store with a squeaky front door and a few scattered gas stations that closed early. Even the McDonald's shut its lights off by 9. So people killed time the old-fashioned way, driving the back roads, sitting around bonfires, fishing in muddy creeks, or doing dumb stuff like poking around in the old mining hollows. Whole stretches of land where families used to live before the mines dried up. Places that felt like they were holding their breath. That Saturday, Caleb woke me up with a half-eaten Pop-Tart in his hand and said we were going house hunting. Not in the real estate sense. He meant exploring the forgotten houses hidden deep in the hills. Most of them still got stuff inside, he said through a mouthful of strawberry filling. Like folks just walked out in the middle of dinner and never came back. I didn't believe him. I figured they'd been cleared out, vandalized, picked clean a dozen times over. Still, it beat sitting on the porch all day watching cars rust. So I said, sure. We backed a cooler with a few sodas, grabbed a flashlight from the hall closet. Caleb tossed a crowbar in the bed of the truck with a weird kind of confidence that made me wonder if this wasn't his first time doing this. The road we took wasn't on Google Maps. It started paved, then cracked, then turned to gravel, and eventually just dirt. Trees arched over us like a tunnel. The green, so thick overhead it felt like driving into a cave. The radio cut out pretty early, and my phone signal disappeared not long after I watched the mailbox count dwindle to none. No more driveways, no more fences, just trees pressing in, and the occasional carcass of a rusted-out car half swallowed by vines. After about 40 minutes of driving with nothing but the sound of tires on loose rock, Caleb slowed down. There, he said, pointing out the window. The house was barely visible through the trees. White paint peeled down to gray. Its roof caved in at one corner. The front porch bowed like it was curtsying. One of the windows was gone entirely, and the others had jagged glass tees still clinging to the frames. The front steps were so warped they looked like they'd collapse under a squirrel's weight. In the tall grass I saw a child's tricycle tipped on its side, the seat eaten through by weather. The front door hung open, just barely, like it hadn't decided whether it was staying or going. Caleb shot me a look, that stupid smirk he always wore when he was about to do something dumb. Then he hopped out of the truck and headed for the porch. I followed, slower. The air felt heavier somehow. Still, like even the birds had stopped bothering. Inside, every step creaked, loud enough to make me wince. The floor sagged in spots, and I kept imagining one wrong move would draw me into a basement full of raccoons. The smell hit me halfway through the doorway. Dust and damp wood and something else, something sour and old, like forgotten laundry left to rot. We were in what must have been the living room. There was a couch frame missing its cushions, a side table with a broken lamp and an overturned chair. A cracked mason jar sat in the far corner with something crusted at the bottom. Near the staircase, a child's sneaker was wedged beneath a broken banister. Too small for anyone but a toddler. Caleb headed toward the kitchen, his boots echoing through the empty house. I followed, flashlight in hand, more for comfort than visibility. It was still light out, but the house seemed to swallow daylight. The kitchen was a show. Cabinets gone, sink rusted through. But in the far corner, leaning upright against the wall, was a door, not attached to anything. just propped there. It looked heavier than the frame it leaned against, like it didn't belong to the house. Caleb tapped it with his boot. It wobbled, and something behind it shifted. He stepped aside, and a book slid out. More like flopped, heavy and swollen with water damage. The cloth cover had once been green, maybe. Now it was the color of pond scum. I picked it up. It felt warm, which didn't make sense considering the house was cool and shadowed. The pages stuck together a bit as I flipped through. The first few were blank, then words. Scrawled in awkward, almost hesitant strokes. Not cursive, not print, something in between. Like whoever wrote them wasn't used to writing at all. The first page just said Mina. The next, Father. Then Orchard wrote. Another 4 years. I felt Caleb lean in, peering over my shoulder. This is weird, he whispered, like talking loud would wake something. I didn't answer. The words kept coming. Not sentences. Just fragments. Mother with Eli. Lost in woods. Cold. Father waiting. Each page was worse. More desperate. More jagged. Some words were repeated. Brother here. George gone. Then one word. Goodbye. It had been written so many times on top of itself that the paper was ripped straight through the center. I looked to Caleb. He looked back, eyes wide, for once not joking. I flipped back to the beginning to reread what we'd seen. Blank. Every single page. Except the last one. Still torn. Still heavy with that angry, Preston goodbye. You messing with me? He asked. I shook my head. My hands were shaking a little. I put the notebook back behind the door just like we found it. The room felt tighter, not darker exactly, just aware. I could notice this now. Let's go, said Caleb. Didn't argue. We walked out fast. No more exploring, no more peeking into rooms. We didn't even talk outside. The grass scraped against our jeans. Some of it was waist high. When we got back to the truck, I looked back at the house and stopped the door. The one that had been leaning in the kitchen. It was now standing upright in the front doorway, perfectly straight, blocking the entrance. I didn't hear it move. Neither of us had gone near the front of the house after we went in. There was no way it could have gotten there on its own, and no way we wouldn't have noticed if one of us had dragged it across the house. We just stared at it for a second. Then Caleb turned the key, and the truck coughed back to life. We didn't say a word the whole ride back. About halfway down the gravel road, I slid off my sneakers. They were damp, not from sweat. Something else. The toe of one had a dark stain I hadn't seen before. It didn't look like mud. I stuffed them into a plastic grocery bag, knotted it tight, and threw it. That was the last thing I did to make sure it ended. I was 26 when it happened. My buddy Drew had just inherited this scraggly little plot of land tucked deep in the southern Appalachian hills. On it sat an old farmhouse that had been sitting there like a forgotten skeleton for decades. The place had been handed down through his family over and over, but no one had ever touched it. The roof drooped like a hammock, the porch leaned as if it were giving up, and the trees had crept so close they seemed to be pressing their palms against the walls. Drew wanted it cleared out enough for an inspector to take a look, and since I'd grown up not far from there, I said I'd help. That first day I rolled up with gloves, a crowbar, and a stack of heavy-duty trash bags. It was early sun just above the trees, and I remember stepping out of the truck and hearing nothing but the tick of the engine cooling down. No birds, no bugs, no breeze. Just that sagging house staring at me like it had been waiting. The smell hit me the second I cracked open the front door. Old wood, rot, mold, and something sharper I couldn't place. Like copper and mildew had been fermenting together for years. The air felt weird too. Thin, like walking into a space that had been emptied out, not just of furniture, but of life. What really threw me was the layout. From the outside, the house looked like your standard boxy farmhouse. 2 windows up, 2 down, central door. But once I stepped inside, everything felt off. The front room was too shallow. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. I walked it twice, then a third time, trying to map it in my head, but nothing lined up. One hallway bent around like it was circling the kitchen, then spit me out into what looked like a mirror version of the front room, only narrower. I figured maybe the place had been added onto over time, one uneven piece after another, by people who didn't much care for blueprints. Still, every turn made me feel like the walls were playing a joke. Not a funny one either. That first day I focused on the front rooms. I cleared out a broken cabinet, a couple of moth-eaten chairs, and a heap of dusty magazines from the 60s. The floorboards groaned with every step, dry and brittle. There were spots where the wood dipped like something heavy had stood there for too long. Twice I found nails driven into the floor at odd angles, as if someone had tried to secure something to the boards, then given up. I didn't think much of it. Old houses get weird. I just kept working. By the second day I'd gotten a rhythm going. Load up the bags, haul them out, try not to breathe too deep. The grass around the place was waist-high in spots and thick, like it was trying to reclaim whatever fell into it. I kept finding old farm tools, half-buried rusted blades, twisted rakes, something that might have been part of a plow. Everything smelled like rust and wet dirt. That was the day I saw it. I just dropped a torn sofa frame near the edge of the clearing when I caught sight of something across the yard, near the tree line where the shadows started. It looked like a person, not walking, not moving, just standing there stiff, almost absorbed into the branches. I froze waiting for them to wave or shift their weight, but they didn't. I called out, no response. I raised a hand, hoping for some kind of sign. Still nothing. I stepped off the porch and walked a few yards toward the trees, my boots snagging in the grass. My eyes never left the figure. It felt like I was being watched, not just by them, but by the whole yard. The weeds pressed against my knees like they didn't want me going any further. And then just like that, it was gone. No rustle, no footsteps. Just gone. I stood there a while, heart thudding, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or a stump. Yeah, a stump that looked a little too human from a distance. That's what I told myself, but I couldn't shake it. Even as I worked, I kept glancing toward the woods, waiting to see that shape again. It never came back. Not then. On the third day, I went upstairs. The staircase was narrow and crooked, like it had been installed after everything else. Each step creaked under my weight, and I could feel the give beneath my boots. The air up there was stale, almost syrupy. The walls looked like they'd once been painted yellow, but had long since turned a greasy brown, and everything felt just a little too close. The upper floor had 3 rooms. One was completely caved in. The ceiling had collapsed, beams dangling like broken limbs, and you could see straight down into the parlor below. Another room was nearly empty, except for a dresser with one open drawer and a cracked mirror hanging above it. But the third room, that once taught me cold, it had photographs. Dozens of them hung in perfect rows along the far wall, all black and white, all ruined by water. The faces had melted away, leaving pale ovals where eyes and mouths should have been. Just hints of collars, hats, shoulders, like the people had been wiped out of their own images. As I stared, I felt that now familiar pressure behind me, not a sound. Just wait, like someone was there. I turned slowly. At the end of the hallway, a pale shape leaned out from behind the wall, just enough to show the curve of a head, a bit of shoulder, no face, not from where I stood. It pulled back the second my eyes met it. I didn't breathe, just stood frozen listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No creaks. I forced myself forward, checking each room again. Room by room, hands clenched, feet heavy. No one was there. But that pressure stayed with me, like the house didn't want me there, but wasn't done with me yet either. After that I worked faster, mostly stuck to the parlor. The silence had grown thick, like even the air didn't want to move anymore. Every little sound felt like a warning. The soft thud of a book falling over. The scratch of something shifting behind the walls. I kept glancing up at the doorways, waiting. That's when I saw him. He was just standing there, in the hall, half in shadow. His clothes looked dusty, colorless, like someone had taken an eraser to him. His posture was off-chin, tilted too high, shoulders too stiff. But what hit hardest was his face, or the absence of it. There was nothing. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched tight across his skull like a balloon. He didn't move, didn't twitch or flinch. Just stood there watching me without eyes. I couldn't move at first, couldn't think. My legs finally kicked in, and I backed away, knocking over the box I'd been packing. Books spilled everywhere. I grabbed my keys off the mantel, fingers fumbling so badly I almost dropped them. The man didn't move. I didn't give him a chance. I tore across the room, shoved the door open so hard it slammed into the wall and ran. The porch steps groaned under me, and one cracked as I hit it, but I didn't stop. I barreled through the weeds, arms swinging, heart punching against my ribs. The truck felt like it was a mile away. I reached it, yanked the door open, keys stabbing at the ignition until the engine finally turned over. And then I floored it. Didn't look back. I left everything behind. Crowbar, gloves, bags full of junk I dragged out with my own hands. Didn't care, didn't even think about it until I was halfway down the mountain. I never told Drew exactly what happened. Just said the house was a mess, and I didn't have time to keep helping. Most weekends, especially in the fall, I'd end up out in the hills with a backpack, a flashlight, and some friends who'd known me since before I could ride a bike. That night started like any other. There were 6 of us. Me, Marcus, Tyler, Joe, Tasha, and Bree. We all grew up within a few blocks of each other, went to the same schools, hung out at the same gas station parking lot when there was nowhere else to go. By then, we were all either in college or working dead-end jobs. But on weekends we still slipped back into the old rhythm, like nothing had changed. Tyler had heard about a group of houses up near Red Ash Creek, hidden past a defunct rail spur and buried under years of overgrowth. Supposedly, no one had lived there since the 80s, maybe earlier. He pulled up some grainy satellite images and showed us a cluster of shapes just barely visible through the trees. That was all it took. We packed up snacks, beer, a couple of flashlights, and drove out as far as the road would take us. The walk-in took almost an hour. The trail wasn't really a trail, more like following game paths and half-forgotten logging roads. It was overgrown with sycamores and briars, and the air was thick with the smell of damp leaves and earth. When we finally reached the houses, it was obvious why no one had come out here in a while. They were practically swallowed by the forest. We found 3 buildings, maybe 4 if you counted the collapsed shed at the edge of the clearing. There was one house that stood out, taller than the others, 3 stories if you included the attic. It leaned heavily to the left, like a drunk on one leg. The porch had partially caved in, and the roof sagged in the middle, like it had given up. The windows were empty, not broken, just gone, like they'd never been there. Everyone stopped in front of it without saying much. I knew right away that was the one we were going into. We always picked the worst one, the creepiest, the most broken down. The one you joke about being cursed just to make someone else go in first. And as usual, we laughed a little too loud, made some dumb jokes to cover the tension, and decided to go in anyway. Not because we wanted to, but because no one wanted to be the one who backed out. The porch groaned under our weight, but didn't break. Every step felt like testing ice. The front door was already hanging open, barely connected by a rusted hinge. It didn't creak. It just drifted inward like it had been waiting. I was the one with the only decent flashlight, so of course I went in first. The smell hit me immediately. Wet wood, mold, and something deeper, like old metal and soil. The kind of cold, musty air that clings to your skin. Inside, the wallpaper had peeled down in long strips that swayed slightly, even though there was no breeze. Most of the furniture was still there but warped and collapsed. A couch slumped against the far wall, springs poking through its torn fabric. A table stood under one of the window frames, somehow upright. In the corner, a rusted cast iron stove listed to one side like it had tried to sink into the floor. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight. Not the usual swirling kind, but thick like suspended mist. We fanned out. Tyler and Joe started poking around, what was left of the dining room. Bree took a couple of pictures with her phone, but none of them turned out right. Just washed out flashes in blurry darkness. Tasha stayed close behind me. Marcus wandered into the kitchen. At first we heard him talking. It sounded normal enough. He had this habit of narrating everything he did when he was nervous, little throwaway lines, jokes to himself. But then the sound changed. His voice kept going, but the words stopped making sense. It wasn't another language. It wasn't gibberish either. Not exactly. It was like someone doing a really bad impression of speaking, like they understood how conversation was supposed to sound. The rhythm, the pauses, but didn't know any real words. It was just noise. At first, we laughed, thought maybe he was doing a bit, but it went on too long, too steady. I remember glancing at Bree and seeing the smile fade from her face. Marcus came back into the living room holding something in both hands, a small metal lunchbox dented and covered in grime. He set it down gently on the table, then looked up like he was about to say something. His mouth opened, and that same fake speech came out. Same rhythm, same nonsense. We all just stood there. His eyes weren't wild or joking. They weren't even scared. They were blank, like he wasn't fully in there. Tyler tried to laugh it off, made some joke about possessed lunchboxes or cursed leftovers. Tasha said maybe there were fumes or mold upstairs making him loopy. I don't know why, but in that moment, I volunteered to check the attic. It wasn't bravery, more like I needed to get away from Marcus and that lunchbox. And maybe I needed to prove to myself more than anyone that nothing was really wrong. The stairs had rotted through about halfway up, so I had to climb along the railing and pull myself onto the landing. The air up there was different, heavier. The smell was stronger, mildew, rust, something sharp and faintly sour. I used my phone's flashlight, since I didn't trust the battery in the bigger one. The hallway was narrow, lined with 3 doors on either side. Most of them were cracked or broken off their hinges. The floor sat under my feet with every step, each groan loud enough to make me pause. I was reaching for one of the doors when my phone slipped from my hand and smacked the floor screen down. The light vanished instantly. Everything went pitch black. I crouched, hands sweeping the boards, trying to find the phone. That's when I saw it. 2 pale round shapes at the far end of the hallway. They were faint, like the last glow of dying embers, hovering at head height. At first I thought maybe they were nails or glass knobs reflecting light. But there was no light, and they weren't still. They pulsed faintly, like something breathing slow and deep. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I felt locked in place, pinned like an insect. The glow didn't move at first. Then it rose slowly, steadily, as if something tall was standing up. That's when I knew they weren't reflections. I lunged forward, fingers brushing over splinters and debris until I felt the cold surface of my phone. I grabbed it, flicked the light back on. The hall was empty, just warped floorboards and paint peeling like dead skin. I didn't wait. I half fell, half slid down the ruined stairs, tearing the leg of my jeans and scraping my shin raw. When I stumbled back into the living room, everyone looked up at once. Marcus sat apart from the others now, perfectly still, staring at the lunchbox like it was talking to him. His mouth hung slightly open. But now, the noise coming out of him sounded different, closer to real words, like a child mimicking adults. Like he was trying to remember how to speak. Nobody said anything. Maybe they were too stunned. Maybe they were pretending it was fine, so they wouldn't have to admit it wasn't. We left not long after, around 11:30, I think. No one argued. No one dared to be the last one out of the house. Marcus followed behind us, silent. He didn't take the lunchbox, just left it sitting on the table, untouched. On the walk back down, he kept falling behind, wouldn't answer when we called his name. At one point, when we stopped to wait for him, I turned and saw him just standing there in the middle of the road, not walking, not talking, just staring down at the dirt like he'd forgotten what feet were for. Everyone split up, and we got back to the cars. Bree and Tasha drove off together. Joe and Tyler said something about getting food. I stood there with Marcus for a minute, waiting for him to say anything. He didn't. Just gave me a weak nod and got into his car. Around 2 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Marcus. He didn't say anything. I heard the faint crackle of static. Then that sound again, the imitation of speech. Softer now, slower, like he was tired or far away. I said his name, asked where he was, told him I'd come get him if he was lost. He hung up. Half an hour later, he called again. This time he was trying to form words, I think. You could hear the effort, like his mouth wasn't cooperating. It wasn't gibberish. It was just wrong, like someone trying to sing a song they'd only heard once in the dream. I told him to stop, told him it wasn't funny anymore, asked where he was. He hung up again. I barely slept. The next morning, his cousin texted me, said Marcus never came home. Said his parents checked the cameras, and the last thing they saw was Marcus crawling out from under a rusted truck in the driveway, standing up slowly, then getting into his car and driving off. No bags. No beers. Never even opened the door to the house. We searched the hills for days. Put up flyers. Talked to rangers and cops and hikers. Nothing. My cousin Nate and I were doing under-the-table cleanup jobs way down in the southern edge of the West Ridge Mountains. You know, that stretch where it feels like civilization gave up halfway through trying. Old houses no one wanted, dirt roads pretending to be paved, and a whole lot of nothing in between. We were getting paid in cash, working places most people wouldn't even slow down to look at. Nobody ever asked us to care who used to live in those houses, or why they were empty. And we didn't. This one place wasn't even on any list. Nate's boss just handed over a few crumpled Polaroids, a hand-drawn map on notebook paper, and said take care of it. That was it. Just up off County Road 31, past a collapsed bridge, and then some weird line. Veer left when the woods feel too close. I remember looking at Nate and saying, what the hell does that even mean? We packed light, just a cooler, 2 sleeping bags, the usual gear. Pry bars, battery lanterns, a sledge, some gloves. We threw it all into Nate's old Ford and headed out. It took us close to 5 hours to find the place. No address markers, no mailbox. The road just turned to gravel, then to something barely passable, twisting uphill through trees so thick they made the afternoon feel like twilight. Branches clawed at the windshield. The canopy got so low it felt like we were being funneled into a tunnel made of bark and moss. We kept wondering if we'd missed a turn, but the map was useless by that point. Just lines and a squiggle that was supposed to represent the old bridge. Then, just as Nate was about to call it quits, the trees opened up slightly, enough to show the outline of a house tucked deep into the brush, as if it had been waiting for us to give up before it let us see it. And yeah, houses being generous. It looked like someone had tried to tear it down halfway, and then just wandered off in the middle. The siding might have been blue once, but it was mostly sun-bleached gray now. The porch sagged like it had given up. One of the upstairs windows was boarded up from the inside, not with nails, with metal strips crossed and screwed down tight, like whoever did it wasn't expecting to open it again. There was something about that window that instantly made me uneasy, like someone had tried to keep something in, not out. The back door was already cracked open, didn't even have to touch it. Inside smelled blank. I don't know how else to explain it. Not musty, not rotten, just empty, like all the smells had been scraped out somehow. You know when a place feels too clean, in the wrong way? It was like that. The floors were stripped bare. Patches of carpet had been pulled up but not taken out, just curled in weird rolls, like somebody got interrupted and never came back. Dust covered everything, but it didn't feel old. More like someone sprinkled it around deliberately to make it look like no one had been there. The furniture was random. No rhyme or reason. A rocking chair facing a corner. 3 kitchen stools stacked in a bathroom. A grandfather clock with its glass shattered inward, and the pendulum still swaying slightly, like it had just stopped. The kitchen drawers were empty. No utensils, no scraps. Not even that sticky residue you usually find. Like someone cleaned the soul out of the place. We didn't talk much while we checked each room. Nate kept his voice low, like the house might hear us. I tried to stay focused on the job, making notes about what to haul out, what could be salvaged. But the upstairs was worse, only 2 bedrooms. The first one had dozens of shirts, same style, same size, folded in stacks directly on the floor. No closet, no dresser, just piles of button-ups like someone had been stockpiling them for some reason. I picked one up, and it felt new, crisp, unworn. Still had a plastic tag looped into the collar. The second room had a black iron bed frame and nothing else. The mattress was gone, and the metal coils were bowed down in the center, like something had been sitting there for years. Not lying, sitting like waiting. The closet door had been barricaded with old strips of tin roofing. Rusty nails bent over themselves, hammered in from the outside. Someone had really wanted that closet to stay shut. Nate didn't say anything for a while. He just stared at it, then finally looked at me and said, "We're sleeping downstairs." We set up our gear in the main room near the fireplace. By then it was close to 5, and even though there was still some light, the forest had already gone dark. There was no cell service, no GPS, not even static on the radio when we stretched the antenna through the window. We tried calling in on Nate CB, just for the hell of it. Dead silence. The quiet felt too big, too wide, like the forest and the house were part of the same thing. So we kept ourselves busy. We cleaned out what we could. Broken bottles, a busted washing machine with a rat nest inside, glass shards from a cracked window. By 6:30, we stopped, made a quick dinner on the propane stove, split a can of chili, and sat in silence. Nate finally broke it with a joke, said the place had Appalachian witch vibes, and we should sleep with one eye open. I laughed, but only a little. The kind of laugh where you're not really sure it's funny. He fell asleep around 9. Out cold in his sleeping bag, roots still on, face turned toward the fire. I stayed up, kept the lantern low, and the sledgehammer within reach. Wasn't scared, just aware. Every time the wind shifted, the house creaked in ways that didn't feel structural, like responses. Then I heard it, not footsteps. Just a single dragging sound from upstairs. Long, low, and slow. Like something being pulled across wood. I froze. Told myself it was wind, an animal maybe, but then it came again, slower this time. Directly above me, it stopped right over my head. I stood up, held the lantern toward the ceiling. Nothing. Just quiet. And then the stairs creaked. Not all at once, one step at a time. Like something testing its weight. Scariest. Pause. Scariest. Nate sat up instantly and looked at me. Neither of us spoke. We just listened. Step, step, step. It stopped on the 5th one. Nate mouthed, "It's halfway." I walked over and shined the lantern at the stairs. Empty. Nothing there. Nothing there. But the air was wrong. Still, but charged like the moment before, a thunderclap. We sat still for a long time, hours. At one point we tried to lay back down. Neither of us slept. Then it happened. The sound of nails popping upstairs, one by one. Then the metal strips falling to the floor. First one, then another. Then silence. I stood up, hard pounding in my throat. Grabbed the sledgehammer. Nate lit the second lantern. We moved to the stairs and looked up, still quiet. Still empty, but we both felt it, like something was about to cross a line. Then it did. Something stepped out onto the hallway floor. I don't know how to describe it. It looked human, but it didn't move like one. Its arms were too long, just hanging. Its shoulders were drawn up tight, like they'd forgotten how to relax. The whole thing moved like it had watched people walk, but hadn't quite figured it out. Its head tilted slightly, not like it was curious, like it couldn't balance. It didn't blink, didn't speak. Just shifted, slow and uneven. Nate whispered, "We're leaving." We backed out the side door without turning our backs, step by step, never blinking. We didn't run, didn't scream, just kept moving. I threw everything in the bed of the truck without checking, didn't care, didn't even lock the tailgate. We drove south in silence, all the way to a 24-hour diner 2 hours away, and sat in the lot until the sun came up. Nate never talked about it again. I was 28 when I agreed to help my buddy Mark survey abandoned houses scattered along the back roads outside Claiborne. Most of them had been sitting empty since the mines closed down. Entire families disappearing almost overnight once the jobs were gone. The county wanted a full list of what could still be restored and what needed to be condemned, and we were the unlucky ones who got the job of actually walking through them, checking every corner, and writing down the details no one else wanted to deal with. The first house didn't look like much from the outside. With the porch sagged so badly the boards dipped like a hammock and weeds grew waist-high around the steps. The kind of place you'd drive past without giving a second thought. Inside the air was thick, old, the kind that clung to your tongue. The floors bowed in the middle, like the whole place had been sinking slowly for years, and the staircase leaned hard to the right, groaning with every step, as if daring me to test it. I went through room by room with my clipboard, checking cracks in the ceiling, writing down broken fixtures and marking things that screamed unsafe. It was mindless work until I walked out onto the back porch. That's when I froze. Blind neatly along the far wall was a row of shoes. All of them were children's shoes, every single pair identical, small and clean. Not worn down, not muddy, not even dusty. They looked brand new, like someone had just pulled them out of a box and set them in a perfect line. They didn't match the house at all. I called Mark over. He walked in, glanced at them and smirked. "Probably squatters," he said. "Dump them here." But I looked closer. The soles were spotless, not a scratch or scuff anywhere. If squatters had been there, they hadn't walked around in those shoes. They looked untouched. I didn't say anything else. I just left them there and went back to scribbling notes. The second property sat higher up on a ridge, hidden back from the road. We had to push through weeds taller than us just to reach it. The windows were boarded shut and the front door was locked from the inside. We forced it open, wood splintering around the frame, and stepped into a living room stripped bare. No furniture, no curtains, just peeling wallpaper hanging in long strips that curled like dried skin. In the very center of the floor sat a small stand, and on it a rotary phone. The cord was frayed, disconnected, trailing uselessly across the floorboards before either of us said a word. The phone rang. Not twice, not 3 times, just once. A single sharp metallic ring that echoed through the hollow house. Mark and I locked eyes. Neither of us moved at first. Then I walked forward, every step creaking under me, and reached for the receiver. The moment I held it to my ear, static poured through. It was heavy, steady, like the hum inside a seashell. And then I heard it. A voice. Broken, distant. It spoke my name. Not my full name. The family nickname I'd had since I was a kid. A name no one outside my family used. No one in that county should have known it. I dropped the receiver, and it swung from the cord, thumping softly against the stand. Mark muttered that we should call it a day. His face had gone pale, but I shook my head. I told him we still had more to finish. If we left early, we'd just have to come back tomorrow, and I didn't want to. The third house was smaller, tucked down in a valley where the trees pressed in on all sides. The roof had collapsed on one end, and the whole frame leaned like it was folding under its own weight. Mark stayed with the truck, said the place looked like it'd collapse if we breathed too hard. I told him I'd only check the front rooms. Inside, dust covered everything, so thick it turned the air into a haze. Every surface bore that same soft gray film, undisturbed for years. I kept my weight on the solid floorboards by the door, not daring to go deeper. That's when I spotted a table by the window. On top of it sat a sealed freezer bag. Inside the bag was a phone. The screen was shattered. Glass splintered like ice. Wires stuck out of the back like veins torn loose. The bag itself was coated in dust, sealed tight as though no one had touched it in years. I leaned closer to look at it. Right then, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed a number. It masked the one etched faintly on the cracked display of the broken phone in the bag. My hands shook as I answered. Static roared in my ear, the same as before. But this time the voice was clearer. It pushed through the noise, rough and urgent, like someone yelling through a storm. It said my nickname. Once, twice, then again louder, faster, almost desperate. I tried speaking back, asking who it was, but the voice didn't answer. It just kept repeating my name until the call ended on its own, cutting to silence. I stumbled outside, the bag clutched in my hand. When Mark saw it, he froze. His face drained, and he wouldn't take a step closer. He said his uncle had owned a phone exactly like that years ago, said the number looked familiar. He swore it was the same number that had called him right after his uncle died. I sealed the bag tighter, set it on the porch, and told them we weren't taking it with us. Neither of us argued. We just left it behind. 2 nights later, back at my house, my phone rang again. Same number. I didn't answer. I just stared at it until it stopped. But then, instead of another call, a text appeared. It read, "It's safe now." I sat frozen on the couch, the phone glowing in my hand. I didn't reply. Didn't call Mark. Didn't even move until the screen went black. At dawn, I drove back to that valley. The house leaned crooked against the trees, waiting like it had been expecting me. I went inside, carrying the freezer bag. I set the broken phone back on the table where I had found it. Then I turned, walked out, and pulled the door closed behind me. I locked it from the outside, even though I knew it didn't matter. As I started the truck, my phone buzzed in my pocket again. I didn't check the screen. I didn't want to know. I just put the truck in gear, pressed the gas, and drove. I kept driving until the valley disappeared behind me, and I haven't stepped inside another abandoned house since. Two of my friends and I had decided to spend the weekend exploring back roads in the hills of West Virginia, chasing after abandoned houses to photograph. It was the kind of trip we used to take when we were bored, picking a direction on the map and just going. We'd heard there were plenty of old coal town houses still standing out there, left to rot after families moved away, and that some of them looked almost frozen in time. We figured it would be an adventure, and maybe we'd get some eerie shots out of it. The drive started out ordinary enough. We passed clusters of leaning barns, collapsed roofs, and porches held up by rusted nails and stubborn luck. Every so often we'd pull over, snap a few pictures of a wreck that looked dramatic enough, then pile back in the car. Most of them blurred together, just weather-beaten wood, shattered windows, vines crawling where people used to live. But then we spotted a path barely visible through the brush. The turnoff was easy to miss, swallowed up in branches, like the road itself didn't want to be noticed. We almost drove past it until one of my friends pointed and shouted. The dirt track cut away from the main road choked with weeds, as if no tires had touched it in decades. We hesitated for a minute, staring at the narrow entrance. It didn't look like a road anymore, more like the forest had tried to erase it. But curiosity won. We eased the car in, creeping along as branches scraped both sides. At the end of the path stood a house. It was bigger than the others we'd seen, but in worse shape. One side of the roof had collapsed completely, leaving jagged beams sticking up like broken teeth. The windows were dark hollows, glass long gone. The porch tilted downward, sagging under its own weight, but the front door gaped wide like it had been left open on purpose. We parked in a small clearing at the bottom of the slope and started the climb up through waist-high weeds. The closer we got, the stranger it felt. Not just quiet, the kind of quiet that presses down. There were no birds in the trees. No insects buzzing around the weeds, no sign of raccoons or deer. Every other abandoned place we'd visited had life around it, even if the house itself was dead. This one was different. It looked untouched, as though everything else had agreed to leave it alone. We reached the porch and tested the boards before putting our weight on them. The wood bent and groaned, but didn't give. The door yawned open to a dark room inside. We stepped in cautiously, each of us silent, as if speaking out loud might disturb something. The front room was bare, wallpaper peeled off the walls in curling strips, drooping like ribbons. A draft moved them gently, though we couldn't feel it ourselves. The air was thick, heavy, like walking into a place where the oxygen didn't move the same. Along the far wall, a staircase tilted upward, its railing broken away halfway. My friends drifted toward what remained of the kitchen, while I headed for the stairs. The steps groaned under each foot, but I kept climbing. Halfway up, I froze. Footsteps creaked above me, slow, dragging, measured. They crossed the floor directly overhead, steady and unhurried. Not boots stomping, not sneakers running, a shuffle. Dust sifted down through the cracks in the ceiling boards, sprinkling onto my head and shoulders. I called out, thinking one of my friends had circled past me somehow. No answer. From below I could hear their voices faintly laughing nervously in the kitchen, too far away for it to have been them. The steps above me didn't stop. I swallowed, forced myself up the last few stairs, and stepped onto the landing. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with 3 rooms. Their doors hung lopsided, half off their hinges. The shuffling sound slid from one doorway to another, circling the landing, but the hall was empty. Every door gated wide, but nothing stood inside them. The noise seemed to move just ahead of me, staying always out of sight. I made myself walk toward the farthest room. The ceiling inside had collapsed in one corner, leaving beams stabbing downward. Patches of daylight filtered through the torn roof, and on the floor half buried under dirt and plaster, I saw them, a neat row of children's shoes. There must have been at least 24 pairs, lined up with deliberate care against the far wall. None bigger than what a 10-year-old might wear. Some were leather cracked with age, some canvas split at the seams, some still tied neatly. Every single pair was caked in dried earth, like they had been dug out of the ground, but all were placed in perfect order heel to toe. I crouched, staring at them, then stood quickly, heart pounding. When I turned back, the doorway looked narrower. I thought it was my imagination, but as I stepped toward it, the frame seemed to pinch inward, the wood bending closer. It felt like the house itself wanted to keep me there. I shoved through fast, scraping my arms on the edges, and broke into a run. I pounded down the stairs 2 at a time, lungs tight. The kitchen stopped me in my tracks. Cabinet doors hung open, wood warped and swollen. On every counter sat cloudy glass jars filled with murky, liquid the color of ash. Shapes floated inside. Twigs, scraps of cloth, maybe bones, though I couldn't be sure. One jar had shattered on the floor, its contents pooled into a slick black stain that seemed to sink into the wood instead of spreading across it. My friends were already outside, calling for me to hurry. I started for the door, but a sharp crack split the air overhead. It was loud, like a heavy beam snapping under sudden weight. Dust exploded from the ceiling, filling my mouth, stinging my eyes. Then the footsteps returned. No longer slow. They thundered from one end of the upstairs hall straight toward the staircase, fast and heavy. The boards above shuddered with each impact. I didn't wait. I bolted through the doorway, stumbled down the slanted porch, and crashed into the weeds. I pushed through as fast as I could, branches whipping against my legs, until I reached the car. My friends stood pale and silent, eyes locked on the house. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and within seconds we were speeding down the path. Gravel spitting out behind us. No one spoke for miles. The silence in the car was just as heavy as it had been in the house. I kept glancing back through the rear window, half expecting to see someone or something standing on that crooked porch watching us leave. But the house grew smaller, swallowed by the trees until it was gone. That was the last abandoned house I ever stepped into in Appalachia. My mom had been cleaning out foreclosed houses for a while, mostly up in the hills around Dunrow Ridge, and it was the kind of job that never sounded as bad on paper as it felt in reality. On paper, it was just hauling out old junk, sweeping through empty rooms, locking things up so the bank could eventually sell them. In practice, it was long days of dragging out moldy furniture, bagging up clothes that reeked of mildew, stepping over rotting carpet and smashed drywall, and finding things that made you feel like you were walking through someone else's ghost of a life. Sometimes I went with her, partly because she needed help with heavy lifting, and partly because she didn't like being alone at certain houses. You'd be surprised how many people still tried to sneak into those places, mostly to grab copper wiring, sometimes just to squat for a night. She was tough, but she wasn't reckless. Having an extra pair of hands gave her peace of mind. Most of the time it was dull, just work. We'd haul bags to the truck, maybe laugh at some weird thing we found, like an entire stack of VHS tapes with no labels, or a doll with its head taped back on. Creepy, sure, but never dangerous. That changed when she picked up a set of properties deeper in a hollow, off Barlow Road. Locals didn't like driving that stretch. They'd mutter about bad history, drug problems, the occasional strange story about people disappearing in those woods. My mom didn't believe in all that, and I didn't either. At least not until we started noticing him. She told me about a man who had been hanging around the houses. At first, he played it casual, pretending to be interested in scrap. He'd wander close, ask vague questions like whether anyone had already pulled the wiring, or if the shed still had metal tools inside. It was easy enough to shrug him off, but she said something about the way he lingered didn't feel right. Then he dropped the act. He stopped pretending to care about copper. Instead, he started showing up without saying a word. Sometimes he'd sit in his truck at the Treeline engine idling. Other times he'd lean against a tree and just watch. My mom would try to keep her focus on her work, but she admitted later that her hands would shake when she noticed him in her peripheral vision. I told her straight out she needed to report him to her contractor. And if that didn't solve it, go to the sheriff. She nodded, admitted she didn't like it, but also said she didn't want to stir things up. That was her way to deal with problems quietly, avoid making enemies in small towns. That week, she asked me to drop her off at one of the hollow houses. I borrowed her truck for work that day, so she needed a ride. I drove her out in the late afternoon, helped her unload some supplies, and promised to come back after dark. When I pulled in that evening, headlights sweeping across the sagging porch, I saw him immediately. He was leaning against the porch rail, cigarette glowing faintly, just standing there. The way he held himself made my skin prickle. He didn't move, didn't nod, didn't say a word. Just stared, like he had been waiting the whole time. My mom came down the steps, handed me a folded slip of paper with cash inside, and told me to grab some supplies from the company's shed behind the house. I slipped on my jacket, the one that covered the pistol I carried when we were deep in the woods, and walked to the shed. The lock was stiff, the door swollen with damp. I forced it open, stepped inside, and shuffled boxes and cans around just to make noise. When I turned back toward the house, he wasn't on the porch anymore. He had stepped off and was walking the edge of the yard, slow and deliberate, always keeping a certain distance from me. He didn't walk straight toward me, but every time I shifted direction inside the property, he mirrored it. It wasn't curiosity. It was matching me. To test him, I called out to one of the other workers at the next house over. The guy was crawling under the foundation with a flashlight, checking for leaks. I asked some nothing question about the concrete, just noise, just something to break the tension. But the man didn't look away. And now I noticed something else. He had something clutched in his right hand, gripped so tightly I couldn't tell what it was. The worker under the crawl space noticed too. He muttered, barely loud enough for me to hear that he didn't like the way that guy was staring. I nodded once and walked away, heart thudding. I made my way back toward the truck, not rushing but steady. Sure enough, he shifted again, pacing me at that same slow, deliberate rhythm. When I pulled open the truck door, my jacket slipped and the pistol at my hip flashed into view. That was when he finally broke. He stopped mid-step, locked eyes with me, and for the first time, I spoke to him. "You need something from me." He froze. Then, sudden and awkward, he spun, almost stumbling, and walked fast down the lane to his dented pickup. He slammed his door shut and sat there. The engine idled. The glow of his cigarette flared, then faded. My mom's voice was clipped when she told me to get in. We drove down the lane, gravel pinging against the wheel wells. For a moment, I thought it might be over. Then his headlights flared in the mirror. His truck roared, swerved past us, and blocked the lane. He shot forward again. The fist jailing so hard rock sprayed into the ditch. We slowed, followed cautiously. A mile later, around a blind curve, his truck was sideways across the road, angled like a barricade. My mom didn't hesitate. She floored it. We tore past with barely inches between us and the ditch, the truck rocking violently as we skimmed through. I clutched the dash, watching the mirror, but he didn't follow this time. Still, I didn't exhale until I saw the gas station lights ahead. We pulled under them, the whole place buzzing harshly. I got out to pump gas, phone already in my hand, pistol sitting on the seat beside my mom. She kept the doors locked tight. After a long minute, I called her contractor. I told him exactly what had happened. Every detail made it clear that if that man showed up again, I'd be going to the sheriff without hesitation. The contractor sounded stunned, like he had no idea who I was talking about, but he promised he'd handle it. The next morning, I filed the report anyway. That evening my mom came home with a different look on her face. Relieved, she said word had spread fast. The man was banned from every property. His truck had been spotted getting towed, and other crews finally admitted he had been hovering around them too. No one knew what he wanted. No one knew how long he'd been showing up. It wasn't just her. What sticks with me isn't the chase or the truck blocking the road, or even how close we came to being trapped in that hollow.